Leviticus chapter 15. Sexual uncleanness. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Speak to the Israelites and tell them, when any man has a genital discharge, he is thereby unclean. Such is his uncleanness from this discharge. Whether his body drains freely with the discharge, or is blocked up from the discharge, his uncleanness is on him all the days that his body discharges, or is blocked up from his discharge. This is his uncleanness. Any bed on which the man with the discharge lies is unclean, and any article on which he sits is unclean. Anyone who touches his bed shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever sits on an article on which the man with the discharge was sitting shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches the body of the man with the discharge shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. If the man with the discharge spits on a clean person, the latter shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Any saddle on which the man with the discharge rides is unclean. Whoever touches anything that was under him shall be unclean until evening. Whoever carries any such thing shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Anyone whom the man with the discharge touches with his unrinsed hands shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Earthenware touched by the man with the discharge shall be broken, and every wooden article shall be rinsed with water. When a man with a discharge becomes clean of his discharge, he shall count 7 days for his purification. Then he shall wash his garments, and bathe his body in fresh water, and so he will be clean. On the 8th day, he shall take 2 turtle doves or 2 pigeons, and going before the Lord to the entrance of the tent of meeting, he shall give them to the priest, who shall offer them up, the one as a purification offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus shall the priest make atonement before the Lord for the man because of his discharge. When a man has an emission of semen, he shall bathe his whole body in water, and be unclean until evening. Any piece of cloth or leather with semen on it shall be washed with water, and be unclean until evening. If a man has sexual relations with a woman, they shall both bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. When a woman has a flow of blood from her body, she shall be in a state of menstrual uncleanness for 7 days. Anyone who touches her shall be unclean until evening. Anything on which she lies or sits during her menstrual period shall be unclean. Anyone who touches her bed shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whoever touches any article on which she was sitting shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. Whether an object is on the bed, or on something she sat upon, when the person touches it, that person shall be unclean until evening. If a man lies with her, he contracts her menstrual uncleanness, and shall be unclean for 7 days. Every bed on which he then lies also becomes unclean. When a woman has a flow of blood for several days outside her menstrual period, or when her flow continues beyond the ordinary period. As long as she suffers this unclean flow, she shall be unclean. Just as during her menstrual period, any bed on which she lies during such a flow becomes unclean, as it would during her menstrual period, and any article on which she sits becomes unclean just as during her menstrual period. Anyone who touches them becomes unclean. That person shall wash his garments, bathe in water, and be unclean until evening. When she becomes clean from her flow, she shall count 7 days. After this she becomes clean. On the 8th day she shall take 2 turtle doves, or 2 pigeons, and bring them to the priest at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The priest shall offer one of them as a purification offering and the other as a burnt offering. Thus shall the priest make atonement before the Lord for her because of her unclean flow. You shall warn the Israelites of their uncleanness, lest they die through their uncleanness, by defiling my tabernacle which is in their midst. This is the ritual for the man with a discharge, or who has an emission of semen, and thereby becomes unclean, as well as for the woman who has her menstrual period, or one who has a discharge, male or female, and also for the man who lies with an unclean woman.